Good people, this video is all about fusing deviations. We'll cover how the fusion pod works, a few useful rules and tips, and my take along the way. Got some tips or maybe even some fuse combos of your own, let everyone know in the comments. Okay, so what does fusing deviations actually mean? Basically, you combine two deviations and you get a new one. The new deviation gets its own stats and has a probability to inherit traits from its parents. On top of that, you can add fusion materials like furniture or animals to give it some unique traits as well. So, how do you do this? Well, you'll use a structure in your territory called the fusion pod, which you can unlock through memetics. For me, I'm on Visional Wheel on Monibus, so to unlock it, I first go to Cradle, then memetics, then crafting, and if I scroll a bit down we have fusion pod. Right there. By the way, a quick note, in my scenario it was not available in the first phase, it was unlocked in the second phase. Worth mentioning, let's move on. So, using the fusion pod is simple and straightforward. Walk up to the pod and interact with it. Then you pick two parent deviations to fuse together. And if you want, add up to 3 fusion materials to spice the outcome. Then just hit the fuse button and wait for 10 minutes. When it's done, then simply collect the new deviation and that's it. Now, before you press the button, here are 2 things to keep in mind. First, always check the preview on the left. It shows the probability of what deviation you will get, as well as the probabilities for the traits the new deviation might get. Second, anything you feed in as fusion material gets eaten, gone, never coming back. That includes deviations used as fusion materials too, so double check before you hit fuse. Oh, and by the way, the 2 parent deviations you picked stay with you, only the fusion materials are destroyed. Here are some things that are good to know. Using 2 of the same deviations as parents gives you the same outcome back. If you mix 2 different ones, it's a coin flip by default. If your parents are different, you can tilt the odds by adding deviations as materials. The result can inherit traits from those materials and they also push the outcome toward their own kind. You might already know that you can't keep using the same deviations forever. If you hover over a deviation, you can see how many fuses it has left displayed as fusion chances. Each time you use a deviation in the fusion process, it loses 1 count. But here's one thing that's easy to miss at first. Even if your deviation has 0 fuse chances left, it can still be used as fusion material. But be cautious, as I mentioned previously, all fusion materials used gets destroyed. You cannot fuse deviations at all in Eternal Land, and linked deviations can't be used as parents either. This means that you can't transfer deviations from Eternal Land and use them as parents in the fusion pod. However, you can use linked items as fusion materials, and if you didn't know, deviations transferred from Eternal Land are considered linked, and thus they can be used as fusion materials. Next, here are some good to know transfer rules to keep in mind. All deviations can inherit basic general traits from each other, like cheer up. Deviation-specific traits can only be inherited by the same deviation type. For example, a Rain Man cannot inherit Flame Essence Golden Toad from a Flame Essence. Deviations have, as you know, different types: combat, territory, and crafting. And deviations can't inherit traits that are exclusive to other types. For example, a combat deviation can't inherit a trait that's only available for territory deviations. Deviated traits determine whether a deviation's appearance might change. You can get those traits from furniture, animals, etc. And if you have a deviation that already has a deviated trait, like a deviation you got from a previous fusion, that deviated trait can be inherited as well, no matter if it's a parent or used as fusion material. If you add a piece of single-use furniture or an animal as fusion material, it usually gives different traits depending on the deviation type. For example, adding a small signal light to a territory deviation keeps its light requirement fulfilled. But on a combat deviation, it reveals enemies that hit you and reduces weapon damage you receive for 2 seconds. Fusing 2 deviations with the same stats is in no way a guarantee that the child will inherit the same stats. RNG is RNG, keep that in mind. However, high stat parents do affect the resulting deviation stats, the higher the better. And just a small thing, not all deviations can be used in the fusion pod. For example, currently Lunar Oracle deviations cannot be fused or used as fusion material. So, we finally have a use for single-use furniture. That's awesome. I mean, sure, if you didn't have the blueprint, I guess they were useful before as well. But if you had the actual blueprint for the furniture, then the single-use furniture was kinda just an inconvenience. This even makes it possible to sell them for energy links and actually get paid for them. Currently, you can't sell single-use furniture in vending machines, so you'll have to trade with players. But still, I think it's awesome. And as a side note, I hope they make it possible to sell them in vending machines in the future. However, tons of single-use furniture can't currently be used, as well as some animals like turtles. I mean, it would be awesome to create a deviation riding on a turtle. Also, if you get a deviation with bad stats but good traits, you can actually try to fuse with them instead of just throwing them away. It also makes it possible to create deviations more suited for specific tasks. Now of course, when you're watching this video, some of these abilities might have changed, but still, here are just some possible combinations. If you fuse a combat deviation with a boar, you get extra acid when your deviation helps down in deviants. This can be quite useful. I mean, if you're dropping deviants anyway, why not get some extra acid while you're at it? Next, if you fuse a combat deviation with a carton, it gives you 20 extra max load when the deviation is synced. There are tons of situations where this can be useful, and it's never bad to be able to carry more stuff. Now, this one is really useful. If you fuse a combat deviation with a ram, it makes herbivores not run when you're close. Having this trait on your deviation is really awesome when you're out hunting or capturing animals. Next, fusing a combat deviation with, for example, a wall lamp gives it Eureka moment. Then if you're attacked with the deviation synced, the enemy is revealed and you take 10% less damage for 2 seconds. Even if it's just 2 seconds, I can see this be really useful in PvP situations. And here's another one. If you fuse a territory or crafting deviation with, for example, an electronic clock, your deviation can get the precision moment trait. The trait gives 10 mood and energy per hour for all deviations in your territory. This is obviously a pretty good combo, just saying. And this one can be really useful if you're playing Way of Winter. You can fuse deviations to get heat and cold resistance. Air conditioners and fans give 10 heat resistance, while, for example, candles give 10 cold resistance. And here's the last one. If you fuse a crafting deviation with a bear, you get a trait that gives a 10% chance to get double the output. This can be a really good addition to some of your favorite crafting deviations. Of course, there are many more. These are just some examples. Oh, and by the way, just a couple quick notes on fusion and stats. I've tested fusing tons of 1-1 deviations together, but I haven't been able to get like a 5-5 deviation by combining super low stat deviations. So, I've developed this theory. I mean, I can't really back it up, but still. I think that, you know, when you capture a deviation in the world, it says it has a level. And if you see it's a level 1, then you know it's a 1-1 or 1-2 whatever. And it seems like if you fuse a corresponding level 1 with another level 1, you simply get a level 1 deviation. However, I have fused deviations with good stats, like 5s, and got worse deviations, so it sure is possible to go down. My take right now is that you at least can't rely on deviations with low stats to spit out deviation with big stats. And also, the stats on the deviation can at times even have worse stats than the parents. But I might have just been unlucky. Also, I'm not 100% sure about this, but it seems like the stats on the deviations added as fusion materials doesn't affect the end result in any way. At least it hasn't during my fusion attempts. But who knows? Do you know? If you do, let me know. And by the way, if you merge smaller deviations together and got something big like a 5-5 or 4-5, or if you have some tips on what to fuse, let me know in the comments. That's it for this video. Have a nice day, everyone.